Good evening, and welcome to the 2012 Distinguished Teaching Awards ceremony. My name is Andy Packard, and I am the chair of the Academic Senate's Committee on Teaching. This ceremony is our annual campus-wide celebration to teaching. It's a wonderful time when we bestow on the very best our attention, praise, and gratitude. It's in meeting them and hearing their stories we get inspired regarding our own role in teaching on campus. The ceremony also serves as a reminder to reflect for a moment on all the unrecognized teachers and mentors who've individually led us to where we are. I've been on the committee a few years, and with this committee, I really developed a new relationship to campus teaching. I learned firsthand about the very best teachers on campus through the nomination and a long, informative selection procedure. In doing that, my sensitivity and awareness of all things teaching was amplified. I now notice colleagues who are quietly developing new ways to deliver their class more effectively. I start to see larger grassroots efforts by individuals to improve teaching, and college-wide and even larger activities related to teaching, access, and delivery. Through this increased awareness, I've gained a newfound appreciation for all the people supporting this noble activity. So for me, it's the culmination of a very inspirational year, and actually a day where I might outdress some of my colleagues, which doesn't happen very often. So thank you for joining me today as we publicly recognize our 5 new distinguished teachers. With that, I am pleased to welcome and introduce Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost George Breslauer.
Good afternoon. These are the kinds of occasions that you just can't get too much of. To celebrate our colleagues who are doing spectacular jobs of teaching our students. I've been at Berkeley now for 41 years, and let me tell you, although the Distinguished Teaching Awards existed when I arrived in 1971, there were not many other opportunities to celebrate and recognize our colleagues for teaching as well as for many other services that they provide to the university. Things changed, I think, sometime in the late 1980s and onward, and more of these recognition events were invented and instituted, and I think that they have been all to the better. Because after all, we are a community of teachers and a community of scholars, and we ought to have as many opportunities as we can to create a celebratory context within which we acknowledge those who do it just so superbly. Since 1959, many of you may know, 245 faculty have received this award, and that represents only about 5% of the faculty who have taught here. So this is really the cream of the crop. The 5 recipients this year represent the best of Berkeley: renowned researchers, engaged scholars, and teachers who inspire their students. They are representatives of all those outstanding teachers that we have at Berkeley. Distinguished teaching, as we know, is not easy to deliver. Students are uniform in their praise. In particular, students mention these teachers' cultivation of an open and inclusive environment, inspiring them to speak up in class and challenge preconceptions. All of these teachers keep their content dynamic and up to date, whether it's sharing a lived experience, translating new works, connecting new ideas to old literature, or historical events to current politics, or keeping on top of the latest law. These courses have been so powerful as to inspire some students to switch their majors or to focus their studies. I've often wondered, what does it take to be a truly great teacher? Well, we know what it takes to be a truly poor teacher. I mean, if you have terminal stage fright, or if you can't put a coherent and cogent sentence together, you don't belong in the teaching profession. But I can tell you, we have very, very few, if any, of such individuals teaching on this campus. We take teaching seriously. And when I ask myself, what does it take to be a great teacher? I suppose among the elements are extroversion, a capacity to excite passion and enthusiasm, a capacity to make complexity intelligible and indeed intriguing, a capacity to raise questions that force the students to intrigue themselves, a capacity to articulate clearly and to make compelling arguments, but without being overbearing. Now, some people might rationalize, well, exceptional teachers, it comes naturally. They were just born with that gene. Bull. Julius Erving, the great professional basketball player, once saw himself characterized as having natural talent. He said, all those days that I was in the gym for 8 to 10 hours practicing my shots year after year after year, and now they just chalk it up to natural talent. No. Great teaching does not come easy, even to those people who have all the attributes that I've mentioned, because great teaching also requires dedication and preparation. You have to be dedicated and conscientious about your teaching, and these Distinguished Teaching Award winners have that trait. They care greatly. They want to go in there and give it their best. And that takes time. That takes preparation. You can't extemporize that. You've got to put in the hours required to deliver that dedication in a way that excites all of those reactions from the students that I mentioned earlier. And these Distinguished Teaching Award winners today have all of those attributes, and they have that dedication, and they put in that preparation, and they deliver. And so I thank you, and I salute you.
Thank you, George. Next, I'd like to introduce Professor Bob Jacobson, the chair of the Berkeley Division of the Academic Senate, and professor of physics.
I'm here to deliver the congratulations and thanks of my colleagues among the faculty, but I want to express a little bit about why it's important first. 150 years ago, a little bit less, Berkeley was founded for the purpose of teaching the people of California. Our first goal was to be educators from the very, very beginning. Since then, we have taught approximately 500,000 undergraduates, and I couldn't find the number, so I'm guessing about 60,000 graduate students. And they've gone out and they've made a huge impact on the world. Our teaching mission is very important to what we do. It's important to where we came from. It's important to our souls. So the fact that we as a faculty care about it still is very important. The fact that our best people find a way to excel in it is very important. So I congratulate the recipients this year. I congratulate and thank all the recipients of past years who are in the audience. And I look forward to congratulating and thanking the recipients of future years who are in the audience. And I remind you all that this is a very, very important big deal that your colleagues are accomplishing every day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. Now, a very special part of the ceremony is a video introduction to the 5 recipients. Enjoy.
My mother says that when I was little, about 5 or 6, I would line all my dolls up and lecture to them about the way I saw the world. But then I guess I forgot all about teaching, and it didn't really occur to me that when you did a PhD, it was to learn to teach.
I actually got into Sanskrit because somebody dared me. I had taken Latin, and I knew a little bit of Greek, and I knew German. And someone said, if you want to take a really hard language, take Sanskrit. So I said, okay.
My first lecture was an undergrad lecture. It was spring of 2001. I was very nervous. I had never gotten in front of a room with that many students. I had over 100 students in my class, and my heart was beating. The first 5, 6 minutes, I just felt like I was speaking in a very halting way. And then at some point, it just sort of clicked. Like I relaxed, I figured it'd be okay, and the rest of the lecture went well.
I came from a background as a trial lawyer, and trial lawyers are control freaks. So I had spent countless hours thinking about what I wanted to say, what I wanted to write on the board, what questions I would ask. Got to the classroom early, set up, figured out where I could put my notes, and then the students started to come in, and it really hit me that there were 90 students there, and they were waiting for me to educate them. And I got nervous, but none of that mattered. It was an exhilarating hour, and I knew that I was right to want to be a teacher.
I mean, for the first year almost, all I cared about was getting, because I loved this stuff, I had devoted, so much of my life to it, that it was all about just getting in as much as I possibly could into the time allotted. Even every time, a student interrupted to ask a question or we had an interesting exchange, it was incredible, it was great, but I also experienced them as like temptations from coverage.
I remember my first lecture as a junior faculty, and I thought I had to basically learn all about the French Revolution and its aftermath, and gave this really dense lecture, and I could see people falling like flies, and I think that's when I realized that what we do is not information delivery.
One thing that was on my mind the first few years I taught was I was very self-conscious about the fact that I looked very young. So I'd wear like a suit and try to look very formal because I was 26 or something, so I probably looked like I was 22. It was a little bit weird. The first time I got up on the stage, the students were like, who is that guy?
I still am actually very nervous when I walk into class. And I've been teaching for 20 years. I think somebody here who was actually a wonderful mentor told me that the day I stop getting really nervous and stop having butterflies in my stomach before I walk into a first class is the day I should retire.
Given the stakes that you're talking about someone's life, I don't like...
The best moments in a class are the moments when somebody says something that casts new, unexpected light on a case or a legal problem that I've been thinking about for years.
In terms of what you're describing, where there's some link, but sometimes the angle a student comes at something is so unpredictable that you haven't yet grown the part of your brain that can even cope with it, and you really have to go home and think. And I think, by not trying to fudge those moments.
We get a lot of students who study Buddhism, and and they want to read Buddhist texts, the early Sanskrit text on Buddhism. And then there was one other that you should really be familiar with. Namadhatu, yeah. But they have to take the basic Sanskrit, and of course they have to read all sorts of materials. And suddenly, whole new worlds are open to them.
Sometimes, students will come together before class, start talking to each other. When they start lingering after class, and you can leave them and they're still talking about the material, you have an intellectual community.
The best moments in class are moments where students have a breakthrough, where they think of something new, where they think of something I've never thought of, where they take the discussion in a direction that's novel.
So the racism argument doesn't really hold?
If students are really engaged in a certain topic, we should go with it. And I'll bring it back, I'll find a way to kind of weave it in. But I never shoot students down and say, oh, that's not what we're talking about now, or that's irrelevant.
The rooms in which I teach, I want them to be very safe places, right, for people to take intellectual risks. And because, I do think, right, a group thinks much better than any individual can.
Some of the rules in the ABA Model Code, though, are aspirational.
The class is kind of like a road trip. You want to have an itinerary, but what makes it an adventure, what makes it memorable are the moments of serendipity and the occasions of discovery.
When we're talking about the risks facing African farmers, say, due to weather variability, drought, things like that, I have stories I can tell them about the time I was in Kenya when there was a drought or there was flooding and how it affected friends of mine.
So there was a lot of ethnic fragmentation.
It feels very real to them when we talk about real people's lives, and that feeling of connection allows them to engage with the material, study harder, and care about the material in a personal way.
I'm just wondering, when did op start to have homosexual connotations?
I think the students here are just fearless, just intellectually fearless. And so it just makes teaching so much more interesting.
Berkeley, I think, tends to attract students who are open to rich experience, who are comfortable with diversity, who are comfortable with classes in which there's lots going on at the same time.
You may think that the jury would reasonably draw some of those inferences.
Well, maybe that's right. The students are engaged and contributing and adding to the electricity of the room.
They're always engaging. They'll even challenge you. They'll tell you they don't think you're right, or they'll actually give you an alternate position on something without a moment's hesitation. Whether they're graduates or undergraduates, there's an incredible engagement and a kind of fearlessness that I haven't seen before.
I love teaching at Berkeley. The students are brilliant, and they care about the world in a real way.
I've taught other places, and I definitely think the Berkeley students are just some of the best in the world.
Every class is an encounter. The students are encountering a tradition, and I'm helping them encounter that tradition. And the electricity of the encounter is what makes teaching so thrilling and so joyful.
Watching the students grow, not only their actual abilities grow, but their kind of intellectual worlds expand, and learning how to ask questions differently and how to, reapproach issues in different paradigms. I mean, that's exciting.
There's no other profession that allows you to engage with so many interesting, idealistic young students every day. When students come up to me at the end of the term and say, I'm gonna get a master's in international development, or I'm gonna apply for a job working in India or Africa next year because of your course, that touches me really deeply. I mean, those are very special moments.
There's a novel that I teach that's, it's one of the hardest novels in French. It's this 500-page 19th century French novel on, the 1848 revolution and this really hapless character who's just kind of blundering his way through it. And I had a student last year write to me and say, I'm now working in finance, and every now and then I think back on that novel that I found so tedious and unbearable when we were reading it, and I tell myself, I can't let myself become that character and have that kind of relationship to my experience or historical experience. And it was amazing.
The fact that there actually exists a place where you can take kind of 4 years out of your life as an undergraduate and really, sit and think about things and try to write about what other people have written is to me, I can't believe I get to be a part of that.
At the end of the year, there's economics department commencement, and I go every year, and I love that day. There are just thousands of family members, often from big immigrant families. Some of these kids are the first in their family to go to college. Both my parents are immigrants. They had their own struggles, so I really identify with those families and those students, and I feel like being at Berkeley, I'm part of a bigger social mission when I see the opportunities we're giving to those kids.
Go Bears!
It's very fulfilling.
I present to you the 2012 Distinguished Teachers at UC Berkeley. So we'll begin the presentation soon, but I just want to tell you a little bit about the process of that's gotten us to this point where we're presenting the awards today. As George mentioned, 245, I had counted 242, so I was off a little bit. But since 1959, cutting across all disciplines, all departments, all colleges, the campus each year recognizes a handful of its best teachers. So the award process starts out for the committee in October when the candidates, unbeknownst to them, are nominated by their department, and a packet comes to our office, and we begin the first process of assessment. It's a three-stage process with 2 junctions, at which point choices and decisions are made. The choices and decisions are difficult, right? It's both a joyous and a heart-wrenching activity, but that's often the case in such a worthwhile endeavor. We read teaching evaluations, of course, lots of those, thousands of those, letters from colleagues and former students, CVs, teaching statements of the candidates, and we visit classes unannounced. All members of the committee go to all of the nominated candidates' classes. We deliberate many times, and today you see the result of the process. I'd like to extend heartfelt thanks to my committee members. They are Carl Brito of French, Gary Firestone of Molecular and Cell Biology, Jenny Harrison of Math, Glinda Hull of Education, and Steve Lehman of Integrative Biology. Glinda will be joining me on stage soon to assist in some presentation of the awards. All the committee members would like to extend a great deal of thanks to the staff of the Office of Educational Development, and in particular to Hillary Power and Bobby White for all the effort they put in to get us here. And now I'd like to start with presentations. So I have the honor of beginning by introducing to you awardee Sally Goldman from the Department of South and Southeast Asian Studies. Sally is a lecturer and has been on the faculty since 1980. Author of 8 books, including Devavani Praveshika, An Introduction to Sanskrit Language. Sally is a world-renowned expert in this important ancient language of the gods. She is responsible each year for 4 classes in introductory and intermediate Sanskrit, 100 A and B and 101 A and B. These classes cover Sanskrit vocabulary, positioning, and usage, combining the mythological characters, setting, and plot lines of the Ramayana with the fundamentals of script and syntax. Students offer consistent praise to the approach and the organization of the courses. For instance, the use of Ramayana to teach the text is inspired and extremely useful. Well thought out, amazingly presented, woven together artfully, you begin to grasp a larger, elegant grammatical tapestry of Sanskrit greatness. Many of the 100A students view the class as transformative and acknowledge accomplishing much more than they expected. I honestly did not think it was possible for my brain to consume so much information. Seriously amazing class, the most effective I've taken at UCB in terms of how much I learned, understood, and enjoyed. Apart from so much fascinating grammar, we learned amazing verses. I'm blown away by how much I learned. And this one I like. After just 1 semester, I feel like a different person in a new Sanskrit enlightened universe. Interestingly, an intermediate class like 101B might have both visiting international scholars drawn to the program by Sally's reputation, as well as local concurrent enrollment and extension students there to acquire cultural and linguistic knowledge of their heritage. Students comment how Sally is able to teach, encourage, and relate to each person at their own level. This differentiated learning requires enormous effort and quality of attention on the part of Professor Goldman. Sally can teach to us as a group and to each individual with unique paces and styles of learning. She knows who is struggling, who is thriving, and who needs attention, and who is ready to be challenged, pardon me. Like a wise, enlightened sage, she seems to know our strengths and weaknesses better than we do. Sally's reach extends far beyond the 8 a.m. classroom. She serves on numerous qualifying exam and dissertation committees and is active in undergraduate research and assisting in students' pursuit of independent studies pertaining to the Sanskrit writings. A colleague of mine and an honors thesis advisee of Sally relayed this: "She was always willing to humor a strange or obscene idea, and in the process helped me think more critically about the text to which I referred. Furthermore, she encouraged me to think non-conventionally about the crossroads where religion and women's studies meet, which helped me a great deal in my subsequent graduate studies. Her wit, patience, and sheer breadth of knowledge impressed upon me a need for lifelong learning, and I will always be grateful that she gave me the opportunity to work with her." A PhD student writes about Professor Goldman's work: "Her analysis of women in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata," I had it before. Mahabharata, I'm not even going to try, forget it, "provides a frame to question traditional gender roles and to celebrate the way Indian heroines can be strong and subversive. Her scholarship in gender and literary studies has stretched the conservative boundaries of this field." All letters single out her unyielding dedication. A separate PhD candidate writes, "While what many may fail to appreciate is Sally's remarkable devotion to individual students. Her guidance was essential at every stage of my dissertation writing process. While abroad studying Cambodia's Sanskrit inscriptions, I would frequently email her attempted transcriptions and translations of extremely difficult texts, and she always responded with corrections and suggestions that must have taken her hours late at night to write. Sally's generosity and curiosity have obviously led her to go above and beyond her official responsibilities." In her teaching statement, Goldman says, "Making the opaque clear, the past alive, and the difference familiar, these are the things that I love about teaching. While I never compromise rigor, I find that a dose of empathy and a bit of humor go a long way toward making what seems impenetrable manageable. A good teacher should never forget what it's like to be a student." A student recognizes that and says, "The ability to inspire delight in a subject as infuriating as Sanskrit grammar is a great feat." Professor Goldman's skills in leading students to find their own answers builds confidence and yields a firm foundation in both a language and the larger world of meaning. A postdoc concurs. Sally's teaching style accomplishes an uncanny alchemy of nurture and rigor. This perspective, along with her gentle, firm classroom management skills, was clear to all committee members. One noting after a class visit, "After working an hour on detailed technical translation exercises, the fully engaged class took a brief interlude into some collective literature reading. Something which I obviously missed was very funny, and the class broke out into a pleasant, relaxed laughter, like a happy family at a dinner table. Juxtaposing this with the evaluations we had just read about the nonstop intensity of the course makes it apparent there's something very special here." Indeed. So please join me in congratulating Sally Goldman as a 2012 Distinguished Teaching Award winner.
Well, what a tremendous honor it is to be here today. I just thank you so much. How does one, after all, become a teacher of Sanskrit, of all things? I can assure you that I did not begin my academic career planning to become a Sanskritist, let alone a teacher of Sanskrit. In fact, like so many others, I started off as a pre-med major. Eventually, I began studying linguistics. Then came the moment that sealed my fate. You heard a little bit about it on the video. I had been working on a problem for a class in syntax, and a friend dared me, "If you really want to study a hard language, take Sanskrit." How could I refuse? I enrolled, and I was given a copy of William Dwight Whitney's 1889 Sanskrit Grammar and Charles Rockmell Landman's 1884 Sanskrit Reader, a book, by the way, we still do use. Virtually the same teaching materials that had been in use throughout the United States since Landman had originally introduced them at Harvard. The rest, as they say, was history. Sanskrit is, after all, a very difficult language, and for those of you who've studied it, you know. And for a long time, its study was made harder by the lack of adequate teaching materials and the aura of exclusivity. When Sanskrit was first introduced into the Western Academy, the study of Sanskrit was not even accessible for those who had not studied Latin or Greek. For much of D.H.H. Ingalls' career, he was, by the way, a professor of Sanskrit at Harvard, the Harvard catalog listing declared, and I quote, "Sanskrit is a difficult language. Students are encouraged not to take it." Okay. It was when I began to teach Sanskrit myself that I felt that there was a better, more engaging, effective, and efficient way to study and understand this incredible language and the culture of which it is a premier medium. It is really to this end that I have dedicated my teaching career, and it is to this end that I put so much effort into the creation of accessible teaching materials. But there is no teaching without students, and it is to my students that I owe this honor. Berkeley students are so special, and they really are. They are truly the brightest and the best. My students have come from virtually every continent. They are smart, they are hardworking, fun, and dedicated. They bring with them questions and ideas and their hopes and their dreams, all of which challenge me to constantly reevaluate my own approaches to both scholarship and teaching. They constantly challenge me to reframe my own questions, and I appreciate it. So to all of you, a very, very deep thank you. And so to my students and my own teachers, I might say, Nahi sushikshito na natabatuhu swaskandam arodhum patuhu. In English, right? And no matter how well trained a tumbler's boy, he is not able to stand on his own shoulders. I would also like to thank some very special people. The first, of course, is my partner of so many years, Robert Goldman, himself a recipient of the DTA just a few years ago. We are now officially the third UC couple to have been honored the award, but I would wager we're the longest time apart, some 38 years, which is really a little embarrassing, actually, if you think about it. He has, for so many years, put up with my teaching a class every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 8 a.m. To this end, I also have to thank my son, Aaron, who I hope made it, who for his entire childhood was routed out of the house at 7 a.m. and rushed to daycare or school and dropped, literally dumped on the sidewalk and said bye, so I could just make it to my classes. Finally, I would like to give special thanks to Martine and the staff at Cafe Milano, who have faithfully provided me each morning with a latte so that I can make it through my class. A couple of times they even have opened early for me, so it's been very special. I would like to thank as well the department chair of the Department of South and Southeast Asian Studies Chair, Penny Edwards, whose support, whose enthusiasm and hard work was clearly instrumental in this honor. Thank you, Penny. I would also like to thank especially the staff of CEAS for all of their efforts, and of course to all my colleagues. I was told, in fact, not to thank the committee, so I won't. But I would like to mention my admiration for them. They actually, as you heard, each one of them sat through my class. It is not easy. They're 2 hours, and they go, mostly in Sanskrit. And usually, I was actually told them I was being a little nice. I did write in a little bit more English on the board or Roman than I normally do. But they did, all of them sat through all of those classes, and that required some perseverance, I would think. And, by the way, to those of you who might wish to study Sanskrit, I only have to say, Vanyeka samalam karoti purusham yasamskrita dharyate kshyante kalubhushanani satatam vagbhushanam bhushanam. The Sanskrit language, which, when refined, endures, alone, and that alone adorns a person. Mere ornaments always fade. The ornament of Sanskrit is the only true ornament. Thank you so very much.
There was actually quite a bit more English in your class than in Debarati's class, I think. Next, let's congratulate and honor Distinguished Teaching Award winner, Professor Edward Miguel from the Department of Economics. Ted is a professor of economics and on the faculty since 2000. He's a development economist and, as a senior colleague adds, a pioneer in a new approach to economic development that has blossomed over the last decade, revolutionizing the way we think about how countries escape from poverty. Professor Miguel teaches both undergrad and graduate courses, including Econ 172, Econ 270B and C, and Econ 215B. His colleague continues, the courses offer careful analysis of pressing challenges for economic progress in developing countries. Ted makes extensive use of case studies, often based on his own fieldwork in Africa. Since arriving, Ted has brought a tremendous amount of energy to this department, and he has transformed the field of development at Berkeley into one of our most thriving field of study in economics. The comments by students in Econ 172 are certainly consistent with that assessment. Best class ever. Honestly, this class changed the way I think about the world in serious ways. The material was real research on current, critically important issues. The instructor asked us to take a big leap and engage deeply on advanced material, and the class stepped up to that challenge. Fantastic. The class really enlightened me and opened my eyes to African development. Not only was it informative, it was a wonderful forum for putting theoretical economics into use, especially econometrics. And last, inspired me to pursue development economics in grad school. Great way to end my undergraduate studies. 172 is not a small class, and lots of comments also address the superb structure of the course. A student who's now studying at MIT says, Ted achieved the impossible balancing act of designing a course that has broad appeal, yet is challenging for students at different levels of proficiency. In this regard, a former GSI offers more details. Most remarkable is his extraordinary ability to engage a large group of students in his undergraduate classes while delivering very structured lectures. He conveys technical concepts as well as the intuition that make them important. His use of humor, his intellectually stimulating questions, his rare willingness to listen carefully to students' thoughts and opinions on sensitive topics, and his thoughtful answers produced many enlightening discussions. Grad students in the more advanced courses share the same sentiment. Ted's unique skill is in generating student contributions and weaving them seamlessly and effectively into the narrative. His enthusiasm encourages and validates your own enthusiasm, and his gentle style makes participation highly unthreatening. We feel that we're all in this together, and as a result, more likely to ask a question, make a comment, and contribute to the effort. Some remarks we saw over and over, and they were like this. You know, just great assignments, great lecture, great advice, so glad I came here. Teaching style ideally suited to making broad topics understandable and making the important lessons stick. The committee noticed a theme apparent at all levels, right? Undergrad and graduate, superb lectures that engage and inspire the entire class. We experienced it too in the classroom visits. One member writes, Miguel's lecture on the connection, or lack thereof, between education funding and subsequent economic progress in developing countries was fascinating. It obviously broke some colloquial understanding I had on the issues, and when combined with the impressive students' contributions, everyone learned a lot that day. Now, despite the nearly constant positive buzz, I have to warn you, Ted is not without his detractors. A grad student in 270B writes, he explains things too carefully. It kind of reminds me when I write a letter for one of my PhD students and I say their biggest weakness is they work too much or they don't know when to quit. And so on teaching, Professor Miguel stresses how important it is to bring relevance and meaning to his students. I want even the most hardened PhD student to feel emotionally connected to the people whose lives we will be studying over the next 15 weeks. Without that connection, how can they understand which issues really matter? And without that understanding as a compass, what would guide their research? For undergrads, he follows that same transcendent idea. quoting, "Liberally sharing insights from my own fieldwork in Africa, the right anecdote, perhaps the life struggles of my friends in Kenya, can frame an entire lecture." Ted's a superb and prolific graduate advisor, chairing 29 PhD dissertations so far. Even that success has its roots in the classroom, and there all the graduate students benefit, not just his advisees. A former departmental PhD student, now a colleague, talks about how critical Ted's influence has been. Ted's class did more than teach us about development economics. It taught us how to be researchers. The course brought us to this field's research frontiers while teaching us how to think critically and explore new ideas. Literature that originally seemed impenetrable suddenly felt not only accessible, but likely incomplete. It was in this course that for the first time I began to believe in my ability to do original research. The committee felt that Ted epitomizes the very best of Berkeley teaching. He can bring the current, relevant, leading research to the classroom at all levels. He expertly engages students to be part of the class community, and in the process inspires them to understand and address these many pressing global problems. Please congratulate with me Distinguished Teaching Award winner, Ted Miguel.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here. I really can't believe it. I never thought I'd be accepting an award like this. In fact, when I started teaching at Berkeley 12 years ago, I hadn't really thought much about teaching at all, to be completely honest. During my graduate school training, I had heard it whisper that teaching came in second to research, a distant second, and that young scholars should do everything in their power to avoid doing it. I had never received any formal advice or guidance on how to teach. And when I started drafting the syllabus for my first undergraduate course back in 2000, I felt very lost. I didn't know where to begin. As was mentioned and as came out in the film, I work in the field of international development economics with a particular emphasis on Africa, and African development was the focus of that undergrad course. I wondered and I worried, how can I get my students to relate to the topics in the course? How much are they really going to care about people who live so far away and whose lives are so different, so radically different than our own, at least in material terms? How am I going to make a connection with them? But as it turned out, I was worried for nothing. The excitement and energy I discovered in the classroom in my interactions with Berkeley students changed everything. I found students here at Cal who were both knowledgeable and passionate about global issues, and who inspired me with their idealism. I met many Berkeley students who were immigrants or children of immigrants like myself, and who had firsthand experience with many of the issues I covered in my lectures. Experience counts for a lot in teaching, and what I've learned over time is that posing questions to a class is often the most effective way to unleash their energy and creativity. Of course, it can't be any old question. The thing I probably spend more time on than anything when preparing lectures is thinking of exactly how to pose questions in a way that'll stimulate the most discussion and lead to the most insight among my students. And despite what I had heard in grad school, I've also learned that teaching and research complement each other and reinforce each other. It's not a zero-sum game. The process of distilling key questions and tracing through the answers carefully with my students leads me to new research ideas and insights every single time that I teach. I, of course, did not come to these realizations on my own, and I've benefited from interactions with many remarkable faculty and staff colleagues here at Berkeley, some of whom are here tonight. I'm really excited that my chair, Jim Powell's here, and Emil Schissel, the assistant to the chair. Thanks for your support in so many ways. I'm grateful to Jillian Hart of the Geography Department, I didn't see Jill here, for treating me to a coffee during my first term here as an assistant professor at Berkeley, where she taught me how to teach. She carefully read through the first skeleton of a draft for my undergrad course, the syllabus, and advised me to totally restructure it, to structure the course in terms of debates or dialogues between competing theories. And that was a tremendous insight, and her perspective has had a really lasting impact on my own approach to teaching at the undergrad and graduate levels. I'm grateful to my colleague David Card in the economics department, who absolutely sets the standard when it comes to PhD teaching and advising. David has taught me about so many different things over the last 12 years in terms of teaching and research. How to write effective student recommendation letters, how to craft grant proposals, how to convey research findings in the most transparent way possible. And I continue to be amazed by his energy and his open door for students. I'm grateful to my colleague George Akerlof in economics, whose humility, humor, and humanity welcomed me to campus, and which have inspired generations here at Berkeley. I know that some of my students are here tonight. Thank you so much for coming to this. It means a lot to me. Thanks for making the classes all that they are. And if I can make you out through the lights, you'll all be receiving A's in the course. So, thanks. Finally, I'd like to thank my wife, Allie, who's here tonight, Allie Reed, and my parents, Eduardo and Christina Miguel, who flew all the way out from New Jersey to be here for this event. Thanks, Allie, for putting up with me when I work into the wee hours of the night, obsessing over a lecture that probably would have been just fine as it was, and for genuinely encouraging my love of teaching. I wish our kids were here tonight, but I think everybody would thank us for the fact that they're not. They're 2 and 3. And thanks to my parents, my first teachers, for exposing me to the world every night at the dinner table, and for working and struggling to open so many doors for me. It's a tremendous and unexpected honor to be here on stage in such inspiring company, and I thank you all so much again.
I'm honored to introduce our next recipient of the Distinguished Teaching Award, Joanna Picciotto, Professor of English. She has changed the way I read and think. Her lectures are intricate, complex, and packed with detail. Who cannot love her lectures? They're like fiery sermons that titillate the mind. Well, I felt like someone should be following her around with a tape recorder. This course has absolutely cemented my love of Milton. I never liked Milton before, but now I'm at least neutral. Even when she was sick, she had such charisma while lecturing about Milton that I was convinced that she was faking it. But she wouldn't lie to us. I find that I have to do mental yoga to absorb Milton. But she tempers the arduousness of this task. She inspires us to go beyond in our thinking. And the next thing you know, you find yourself successfully positioned in a mental downward dog. Professor Joanna Picciotto is a scholar of 17th and 18th century literature. Her first book, Labors of Innocence in Early Modern England, was called by one reviewer the most important contribution to Milton studies in years. The reviewer continues, "The book is itself an example of what it is about, a field awash with insights. She follows Milton in transforming a howling wilderness into a paradise of the imagination." Well, as the preceding comments taken from course evaluations make clear, Professor Picciotto's students, although they may not use the same high language as do the ecstatic critics who reviewed her book, her students appreciate her just as much. Her course on Milton, indeed all of her courses, made striking and durable impressions. Since coming to Berkeley, she's taught classes at all levels, from undergraduate seminars and mid-sized lecture courses to graduate classes, on topics as varied as the author in the text, the metaphysical poets, satire, autobiography, and the early modern women authors. And across the board, students in her classes say again and again that she is their favorite professor at Cal. Make no mistake, a big part of her impact has to do with the force of her intellect. I've rarely seen the word brilliant used by students so many times to characterize a professor, even at Berkeley. But there's something else very important going on that makes her classes so impactful. One student explained that he's made it a practice at Berkeley to take classes with the top scholars in their fields, and he went on to mention some of those in his top 10 list. And then he offered this caveat. However fundamentally brilliant any of these professors are, whether they are fully recognized in the authority of their work or simply in the amount of footnotes they enter, I have with no other professor experienced the kind of emotional ignition and earnest commitment that Professor Picciotto brings to every moment of her career. Students experience, they feel this so-called ignition in the performance of her lectures. There's an intensity, a very fast activity level, and aliveness in Joanna's classroom. One of my colleagues on the Committee on Teaching put it this way after he came back from his observation of her. Joanna Picciotto's lecture had more drama, more laughter, and more interruptions than any other that I visited. She clearly enjoyed the in-class give and take, welcoming comments, either prompted or improvised, often writing down students' insights for use in later lectures. Her passion inspires passion. Her ability, as one graduate student explained, to inhabit and expand the terms of other people's arguments and to do so in the moment, it's really quite startling and results in an unusual electricity and attentiveness in lectures. One of her student recommenders noted that even the most unregenerate text messengers, solitaire players, and desk engravers, they all became lively participants in Professor Picciotto's classroom. So the engagement of the disengaged in her classes happens, I believe, for this reason. Her obvious mastery and love of her subject is matched by, it's wedded to, it's one with her love of teaching and her respect for and her belief in her students. Said one student appreciatively, she exhibited a type of unrequited trust in my potential that I'd never had before. And listen to this comment. She effervesces. She effervesces when someone offers an interesting reading. She begs for clarification, and the urgency in her voice and her whole manner encourages the speaker to develop whatever threadbare impression they may have offered into a reading with stakes. She makes you want to be a good reader, not for the sake of a grade, but for its own sake. And here's another. She cares, in italics. She cares truly and madly and deeply. To catch her in the act of teaching, whether delivering a lecture, facilitating a seminar, or conversing in office hours, is to see her lit up from the inside with the force of her caring and with the strength of her dedication to share this energetic enthusiasm with every student who crosses her path. So, is it any wonder that her students sometimes break into verse when they write their evaluations of her? One student drew a big heart on his evaluation form, and he confessed somewhat sheepishly to never having been in love with a teacher before. And he offered this poem. Dear Joanna P., we both clearly see you should run off with me. Maybe not Milton, but you have to appreciate the sentiment and the inspiration. My favorite verse, however, was a quotation from Milton that someone placed as a head note on an evaluation form. Here it is, soared with no middle flight. So just as Milton intended his poetry to surpass that of other authors, being divinely inspired, clearly this student and many, many others believes that Professor Joanna Picciotto likewise soars as a scholar and a teacher. And in fact, the student mused that John Milton himself would have been proud if he had been to her seminars, since Picciotto continues to adorn Milton's grave with palms and laurels by teaching his work so wonderfully. I give you UC Berkeley distinguished teacher Joanna Picciotto.
Thanks. Thank you. I want to thank everyone in the English department, and particularly Georgina Klej and Sue Schweik for making this happen. Okay. Excuse me. I'm a little thirsty. It was nice to. Earlier this week, I was reading a news story about soaring student debt, and perhaps foolishly, I ventured into the comment section where, in a dynamic familiar to all of us, the grounds of the discussion had shifted to the unjustifiable luxury of the niche and boutique course offerings in this time of austerity. As one commenter put it, if you want a degree in a discipline that will not result in a well-paying job, then you might want to consider just studying on your own. At some point in your life, you have to assume responsibility for the decisions you make. I want to take this opportunity to recognize the enormous sacrifices of money, time, energy, and this month, sleep, that my undergraduate and graduate students have made and continue to make precisely in order to meet their responsibilities to other people, many of whom have been dead for a very long time. By lavishing attention on their writings, even taking the time to master antiquated knowledge systems in order to enter their thoughts more fully, my students are providing the people they study with what John Milton called a life beyond life. In doing so, my students are honoring their responsibilities as members not just of an economy, but a civilization. Civilized life requires that we learn not just to support ourselves, but to relinquish ourselves. To be a serious reader, which every university student must become, means being continually on loan to other consciousnesses. The work of hosting other minds demands habits of attention, discipline, and receptivity that can't be cultivated in solitude. They're developed through writing and talking and listening to others. The result of all this writing and talking and listening is rarely satisfactory because the process is never over. I don't think any of us ever feels that we're doing enough for it or getting enough from it. A year after class ends, we might only retain a dim outline of an argument that in fact we were never able to grasp whole. Certain illegible traces, like chalk dust on a blackboard after it's been erased. I've just started quoting from a John Ashbery poem, a prose poem that one of my students introduced me to, and that several of them are now teaching me how to read. I'd like to conclude by reading a bit more of it. So we must learn to recognize it as the form, the only one, in which such fragments of the true learning as we are destined to receive will be vouchsafed to us, if at all. The unsatisfactoriness, the frowns and squinting, the itching and scratching as you listen without taking in what is being said to you, or only in part, so that you cannot piece the argument together, should not be dismissed as signs of our chronic, all too human weakness, but welcomed and examined as signs of life in which part of the whole truth lies buried. And as the discourse continues and you think you are not getting anything out of it, as you yawn and rub your eyes and pick your nose or scratch your head or nudge your neighbor on the hard wooden bench, this knowledge is getting through to you and taking just the forms it needs to impress itself upon you, the forms of your inattention and incapacity or unwillingness to understand. For it is certain you will rise from the bench a new person. And even before you have emerged into the full daylight of the street, you will feel that a change has begun to operate in you. This passage reminds me of how I used to feel leaving school at the end of the day when I was young and felt like I was in the middle of an endless conversion. But it also describes how I feel on most Thursdays after a long bout of office hours. And I have my students to thank for that. Thank you so much.
I'm honored to introduce the next recipient of the Distinguished Teaching Award, Deborati Sanyal, Professor of French. Having come to know Professor Sanyal's teaching, I have a newly invigorated sense of what makes a course challenging and what simultaneously makes it rewarding in its very difficulty. Professor Sanyal researches and teaches at the intersection of French literature, history, and philosophy. Her recent courses have explored the memory of transnational traumas such as the Holocaust, and within such difficult topics, she leads her students to consider literary form and aesthetics in relation to some of the most important and troubling ethical problems of the modern era. Virtually all of her work is interdisciplinary, and it encompasses as well a variety of text forms and genres, for instance, cinematography, as well as literary, historical, and philosophic text. And of course, let me remind you, she teaches the majority of this in French. In her teaching statement, Professor Sanyal describes how in her diverse classrooms like ours, where students' backgrounds are diverse linguistically, culturally, and socially, speaking a foreign language is actually the tie that binds. It becomes the common thread. So some might view having to speak, think, and write at high levels academically in a foreign language as a major challenge. She views that very challenge as an affordance, a way to shift perspective, to step outside habitual ways of thinking and valuing. We are aware, she writes, that we've entered a space of serious play in which language itself becomes a laboratory for experimenting with unpredictable identifications and beliefs, and where our usual identities and narratives can be temporarily suspended, reshuffled, and put next to those of others. So, what do her students think about Professor Sanyal's very challenging courses and methodologies and her quite deliberate attempts to unsettle their identities? They speak of her classes as distinctive and unique, and over again, they convey the intensity and power of their impact. The works we studied were unlike anything I had previously experienced. I have never been more engaged in the readings of any class. I don't think I've taken another class in which I felt I've learned so much. I feel that if someone outside of class actually asked me about Camus, I could really say quite a bit, and easily. For the first time, I really got to know deeply the work of a single author. This course was extremely, all caps, thought-provoking. All the material was dense, fascinating, and discussed at length. Oftentimes, after class, I'll continue to think about the subject matter. And even during class, I have to just sit and ponder what is being said. Sanyal is a tour de force. Other professors should aspire to even come close to her level of skill and intellect. Loved it. My mind is blown to pieces. She is absolutely brilliant. Such responses were not, by the way, limited to French majors or devotees of literature in upper division classes. Such responses ran the gamut. The tour de force comment was from a student whose major is political economy. And a biology major wrote, "I looked forward to each class as a breath of fresh air from all my scientific classes." Now, I would argue that this delight was no accident, and nor was it an artifact of simply appreciating a break from one's subject matter. Instead, the pleasure that students from other disciplines found in Professor Sanyal's French courses was the result of her interdisciplinary design. She imagined her courses precisely so that students could share their knowledge from another field and explore its relationship to the literature they read. So how does she do this? How does she envision and teach courses that demand such a great amount from students emotionally and intellectually, but through which they learn such great amounts and are moved? One student recommender summed up her approach simply as pedagogic magic. But then she went on to reflect on what is most powerfully at play in Professor Sanyal's classrooms. And she determined that it's her ability to position students to experience real scholarship or genuine academic work. And this is what she said. As students of Professor Sanyal's, we felt not just like undergraduates, but like serious scholars, exploring what it means to write and read literature, dealing with concepts that delve deep into our moral fiber as human beings. This sentiment had its powerful graduate correlates. Wrote one former PhD student, Professor Sanyal made us graduate students feel like quasi-colleagues and intellectual equals, and then in parentheses, I so wish I were, in a way that directly contributed to our securing tenure-track jobs. Again and again, we noted Professor Sanyal's remarkable ability to scaffold participation. Commenting on the angst that can accompany being in an upper division French course, a student confessed, although there was not a single student in the class who was not intimidated by Professor Sanyal's outstanding intelligence, I know of no student who felt inhibited in speaking his or her mind. Well, I personally witnessed this phenomenon when I visited Professor Sanyal's classroom. I saw her draw out students' participation over the course of a discussion of a French text and a multimedia presentation of film and image until everyone, even the seemingly reluctant speakers, was contributing. And even I, seated mutely at the back of the room, not having spoken or understood a great deal more French than bonjour since 12th grade, even I felt a yearning to try to speak in order to be part of this intimate, intellect-stretching, ethically alert conversation and community. So I'll mention one other way that Professor Sanyal scaffolded participation in genuine academic work, and this is through her careful and caring responses to students' writing. One student had saved Professor Sanyal's summary comments on her end of semester paper, and she quoted them. This is what Professor Sanyal wrote. Each sentence is beautifully crafted, and I was delighted by your assurance and playfulness as a writer. Please do drop by and see me this semester to discuss this paper further. Perhaps we can explore how you can take this rich and promising reflection forward. Ah, wouldn't you like to get such a response? Yeah? How encouraging, how hospitable. And finally, I will second a one-word comment offered as an evaluation of this professor who has so gracefully sustained a union between academic and pedagogic excellence. Magnifique. I give you UC Berkeley distinguished teacher, Professor Debarati Sanyal.
I am so honored to be here. I'm really, really excited to see my students here as well. Thank you for coming. You know, for those of us working in smaller departments such as French, teaching can be a strangely intimate and ephemeral activity. You know, you teach your small seminars and you have intense intellectual engagements with these brilliant, fabulous students who then, you know, move on to their multilingual futures as you prepare for another batch. But, you know, each classroom has its unique dynamic, its texture, its personality. And I think I can recall something of the texture of every class I've ever taught. Still, it's rare to be given the opportunity to reflect on why you teach or how you teach, what teaching means to you. And it's even more rare to open up the space of the classroom to external eyes or to a camera crew. Ugh. To have that student-teacher relationship represented and celebrated in an event like this, it's extraordinarily moving, and I'm very grateful for the experience. For over a decade, I've had the good fortune of working in a department full of exemplary teachers. I can always count on my colleagues for reliable advice, whether it's on how to tackle medieval allegory, how to present a Senegalese film on colonial conscripts, or simply how to energize students during that dreaded midterm slump. I'm indebted to many of you, but since I'm short on time, I'll just thank Tim Hampton for his extraordinary support as department chair and for the hours that must have gone into the award nomination process. Thank you, Tim. I also wanted to acknowledge two people who are at the very core of our department's teaching mission, our student advisors, Carol Dolcini and Mary Ajade, who on more than one occasion have pulled me out of my professorial fog and back into the reality of our students' needs with efficiency, humor, and chocolate. I've been teaching for 20 years now, and when I started, I was just about the same age as my students, which was alarming and kind of cool. But as the years go by, it seems as though I'm the only one getting older, and they just remain the same age. Funny that. So I'm also really grateful to my Bay Area community for keeping me, if not young, then young at heart, or at least open to fresh experiences, new ideas, fun TV shows that then inspire my classes like Sex and the City, Passions and Fortunes in the 19th Century. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge my parents who early on taught me that education was the ultimate value, as well as my husband, Michael Yarochi, who understands more than most spouses what it means to be a professor at this university, because as it happens, he is one too. My favorite class sessions are those in which I can leave behind my carefully plotted itinerary and just let the work of collaborative learning unfold. The energy can be palpable and the insights unpredictable. There is something simple but extraordinary in the idea of a classroom with real bodies and voices sharing a space and a moment in time. And as universities across the country go virtual, I hope we'll remember this. I only have a minute left before the orchestra starts playing, so my last and biggest thanks go to all the undergraduate and graduate students who have worked with me over the years with such energy, critical imagination, and commitment. It has been a true privilege teaching you. Thank you.
We're running a little long tonight, but I anticipated this. And I polled some previous award winners about the possibility of shortened introductions, and most said they actually had no recollection of ever being introduced. Nerves, probably. So in the interest of time, David, congratulations. You'll never forget, you won't remember that I didn't introduce you. Of course, I'm not serious. I would like to now introduce and congratulate Distinguished Teaching Award winner, Professor David Sklansky from the Bolt Law School. David is a professor of law on the faculty since 2005. He's a specialist in criminal law with a research focus on criminal procedure and policy. He's the author of 3 books, including a popular case book, Evidence, Cases, Commentary, and Problems, which many students cite as one of the best case books used in law school. He's a former federal prosecutor and primarily teaches 3 courses, criminal law, evidence, and criminal procedure. Dean Edley writes that, quote, over the last decade, Professor Sklansky has emerged as a leading contributor to the intellectual revitalization of criminal procedure scholarship in the United States. I visited 2 of Professor Sklansky's classes. My notes read, his ability to take a student's answer and mold it into the next question in subsequent discussion was very impressive. It was remarkable how many times this happened, and yet the overall flow and direction of the lecture seemed to stay perfectly on a logical course. And I walked out of there. I'd actually just been to Las Vegas and had seen Penn and Teller. And you walk out of there and you're like, how did they do that? And I thought, how did he do that? That didn't seem possible. I thought it was a lucky day for him, maybe. And then a couple days later, I ran into another committee member who had just completed a class visit, and I didn't prompt them, and they kind of had the same vibe. So, I thought that was pretty weird, but interesting. Then we read files. Of course, we get a lot of files from the department at various times. And it was remarkable how often this story was repeated, just over and over again. A Bolt colleague writes, it was in the second class that I realized more fully that Professor Sklansky carries the entire lesson in his mind. He lectures briefly to set up questions, leads a discussion where answers lead to more questions, and then summarizes where the discussion is led. He moves with and from that, using a hypothetical or a policy choice which has seemingly emerged organically from what has come before. But it can't be the case that the discussion will always lead to what he thinks the next topic should be. It can't be. Thus, he has to take and run with students' comments, whether it moves him into unforeseen issues or towards a transition to which he has previously planned. The technique is common in law school teaching, but David's mastery and his ability to create this synthesis are unique in my experience. He can go anywhere with the students' input that he receives. This allows him to call on more students, to let the discussion take off if they make a valuable contribution, and to make the points himself if needed without overemphasizing deficiencies in their responses. A student comment echoes it one more time. He is meticulously well prepared for his lectures. Every minute seems planned out, every question anticipated. Professor Sklansky frequently answers a student's question by simply clicking to the next slide. And yet there was nothing canned or rehearsed about his lectures, just the opposite. We were encouraged to question everything and everyone. Another typical student comment contrasts their preconceived expectations with Sklansky reality and an acknowledgement of the 180-degree difference. A student in the evidence course comments, "I will preface my comments by saying I hate rules classes. Yet this course was an example in how to teach a rules class well. In addition to hating rules courses, I also hate PowerPoint presentations. This course is once again the exception to the rule." David's sensitivity comes up often. A student writes, "On the day that we talked about rules pertaining to victims of rape and sexual assault, he started by explaining how we should approach the subject as a class. The points he made were so sensitive and reasonable that it made me feel much more comfortable with the discussion we had. Not all professors are able to talk about difficult subjects with such wisdom and openness, and I really appreciated it." Another writes, "Professor Sklansky is really good at talking about difficult issues. He exposes critical issues in evidence law. He's sensitive to issues of race, class, and culture, and whether the system of evidence is truly serving the purposes of justice." All evening we've heard about how these four preceding winners are able to jolt individual students off a path by showing them the beauty, complexity, intrigue of a new subject at hand. The same thing happens here too. Student comments, "When I came to law school, I did not have an interest in criminal law, but Professor Sklansky completely changed that." The letters from former students are very touching. They cover everything I've already mentioned and all hit on a variety of more personal points. Overwhelming kindness, deep, concrete roles he's played in their life, his dedication to students as scholars and as people, his sensitivity in teaching emotional topics, his infectious enthusiasm for subject matter, and genuine actions within the Berkeley law community. Let me read you a few excerpts. "He is genuinely interested in his students' hopes and dreams, and he often goes the extra mile to ensure we will develop into brave and courageous leaders. Low-income students, non-traditional students, and students of color in particular seek out his mentorship because of his ability to create a safe space at the law school. Students from the Women of Color write, "Students from the Women of Color Collective reached out to him to express their concerns over the lack of faculty of color at the law school. Professor Sklansky spent nearly 3 hours listening to our concerns and fears. He responded to all our suggestions, and the results were tremendous. Students worked directly with Professor Sklansky to lobby candidates to accept their hiring offers, and as a result, Bolt was able to double the number of faculty of color." And last, "Students entering Berkeley Law are accustomed to being the smartest student in the room, and most will sooner or later be shocked to discover that they no longer hold that title. That experience can either compress and damage a student's sense of self, or it can be a catalyst for deeper confidence, broader horizons, and richer humanity. The difference in many ways is whether the student experiences that revelation in an environment of competitiveness and isolation or of kindness. Professor Sklansky was the first and most frequent faculty member to provide me with the latter, and to the extent I was able to share what he showed me with others, his gift transcended the boundaries of our single professor-student relationship. It was very obvious to the committee that course evaluation comments like this one, love Sklansky. If he's teaching a class, just take it. You'll be happy you did, and all your friends will be jealous. We were convinced, the committee was convinced this was not just a witty remark, but really true to the core. So please join me in congratulating Professor David Sklansky, 2012 Distinguished Teaching Award.
This is a tremendous honor. I have to say it's an honor and a little humbling just to be down here next to these people. I first came to this campus 35 years ago as a college freshman. My first quarter here, we were on the quarter system then, I enrolled in an American Studies course taught by Carolyn Porter, who's now Joanna's emerita colleague and was then a young assistant professor. This was a transformative experience. When we read Walden, Professor Porter didn't let us treat it like an artifact to be studied from a comfortable remove. She pointed out that Thoreau was making an argument and that if he was right, we would all have to change our lives pretty radically. We'd have to start by dropping out of college. And if we weren't convinced that we should do that, what exactly was wrong with Thoreau's argument? This was a revelation for me. Not the idea of dropping out of college, which in the late 1970s was a pretty standard move, but the notion that ideas, even ideas from another century, should be taken seriously and wrestled with. That literature could be a kind of time machine, a direct encounter between the writer and the reader, an argument to be joined, an argument with the highest possible stakes. In my first months on this campus, I learned a way of reading and a way of thinking that have stayed with me ever since. The way that Carolyn Porter taught me American literature was, in key respects, the way that John Searle taught me epistemology. It was the way that David Judd taught me physics, the way that Marina Ratner taught me complex analysis, the way that John Holdren taught me environmental science, the way that Joe Hodges taught me statistics, and the way that Sally Fairfax taught me conservation policy. The common thread was grabbing ideas with both hands, approaching an intellectual tradition not as a museum where you keep your own voices hushed, but as a living, breathing conversation, a raucous, thrilling, hugely important conversation, a conversation that we students were invited to join, and that it would be a kind of dereliction for us not to join. So I have a long-standing appreciation for how much good teaching can matter, how it can change a student's life. And I have a deep familiarity with how much extraordinary teaching goes on at Berkeley. It was a privilege to study here, and it's a privilege to teach here. It is a particular privilege, I have to say, to teach at the law school on a faculty filled with brilliant educators, many of whom have received this award. I'm a vastly better teacher today than I was when I returned to Berkeley 7 years ago. That's partly due to my students here, and it's partly due to my colleagues at Bolt Hall. I want to give particular thanks and recognition to my wonderful senior colleague in evidence law, Eleanor Swift, herself a former recipient of this award, who keeps pushing me and my colleagues to make our teaching even better, and who sets a high bar by her example. I want to single out for thanks the law school's Associate Dean, Gillian Lester, who's been my friend and colleague both here at Berkeley and before that at UCLA, and who in countless ways over the last 18 years has helped me develop as a teacher and as a scholar. And I want to thank a trio of gifted younger teachers of criminal law, Melissa Murray, Sarah Mohammed, and Andrea Roth, who share a hallway with me at Bolt and whose ideas, energy, and passion help me every day to get better at my job. I want to thank all of you for coming here this afternoon, especially my students, my friends, my colleagues, law school's Assistant Dean, Susan Whitman, who worked very hard to get me this award, and my family, my wife, Deborah Lamb, my son, Joseph Sklansky, my father, Jack Sklansky, and my mother-in-law, Joan Lamb. I hope I've made it clear why it means so very much to me to have them here with me when I receive this award.
The California Alumni Association is a longtime supporter and friend of teaching on the Berkeley campus. I'd like to introduce and welcome the Alumni Association's president, Karen Clancy.
Thank you. It's an honor for me to be here to offer congratulations to the award winners. This is a time for all of us to celebrate the contributions of 5 extraordinary individuals. And after hearing all of their comments, listening to the comments of their students, and watching the film, I can tell that this definitely is an extraordinary group. And so thank you for all that you do. The Alumni Association is pleased to support this special event. As an alumni association, this year marks the 140th anniversary of our founding, and with it, 140 years of alumni excellence and service to our alma mater and to our community. The association's purpose was expressed in the original Constitution as the promotion of good fellowship and kindly feelings among its members and the fostering of liberal and scientific culture on the Pacific Coast. As alumni, we're proud to be from Cal. However, the pride we feel as alumni for this great university would not be the same if it weren't for the excellence in teaching and research that happens on a daily basis on this Berkeley campus. While California seems to find ways to disinvest in public education, I am happy to see that the Berkeley campus community of faculty, students, alumni, and staff continue to achieve excellence in the classroom, inside, outside in the community, not just for California, but also for the world. The role of a teacher in today's classroom is more important than ever. But as a research institution such as Berkeley, that role is magnified and critical to our future. I think one of your previous recipients, Leon Litwack, a beloved history professor, said it best when he described the power of a teacher. He said, "The enduring ability of teachers, along with artists and writers, to disturb, disrupt, and inspire, even to change the course of history, is well known. That legacy, unlike many legacies, is well worth preserving." As a Cal alumni myself and parent of 2 recent Cal graduates, I know from personal experience that this university is transformative and it changes you, and it's because of faculty like the ones that we're honoring today. This year's Alumnus of the Year, Eric Schmidt, recently said, "Think Cal, thank Cal." And I'd like to add to that, thank you, our distinguished teachers, for your dedication to the profession and your ability to inspire the next generation of leaders. Fiat Lux. Congratulations.
Thank you very much, Karen. Well, folks, let's have another round of applause for our distinguished teachers. Okay, there's 2 announcements before I let you go. One, I'd like to invite you to the reception being held just across the way in the toll room of the Alumni House. If you just walk outside, it's just 50 feet north of the Playhouse. All the distinguished teachers will be there and plenty of food and drink to enjoy. Also, it's become a custom to ask all the previous DTA winners who might be in the audience tonight to come on stage for an annual photo. So we'll do that right now as we exit. Otherwise, thank you very much for coming. I hope to see you all here next year.